We're recording.
Great. Hi, my name's Arvin. I am the co-founder of United in Heart. We're introducing this this point system called Enviros, which are essentially frequent flyer points for environmentalists. That's how we explain it. And our app, it facilitates communication about the climate emergency and the climate solution through a documentary, which has received quite a bit of praise. And they're both free, so free app, free documentary. And the idea is to amplify communication, enable every person to be able to communicate that very well, very rapidly. And it also encourages people to be intentional about food, carbon, and communication. So communication is an obvious one. Food, which would be veganism, and carbon, which is twofold: reduction of carbon emissions and tree planting, because reforestation is the key to drawing down enough carbon so that we're back in the safe zone as far as atmospheric carbon levels. And in so doing, in developing this app, we haven't released, we'll probably release within a couple months. We realized that we could obtain objective measures of a number of things. So the trees that are planted through our app are all food-bearing trees, so fruit, nut, and edible leaf trees. And they're planted in severely degraded land on rural villagers' land. So it empowers them, it gives them food security. So one of these is if you're looking at that circle there on the bottom left, around the 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock position, it says families uplifted. So that's, an objective measure of that. We convert 60 trees planted to one family uplifted. So anyway, so we have these various metrics that we can we can calculate. And then, so I'm just gonna run through quickly what this concept of Enviros is, because this is what you're looking at right now is the Enviros map. And if we were to look at these these are all the objective measures through tree planting donations and Friends Inspired. So we know how many friends you inspired that come in through the door and said, hey, Unkit referred me in, that sort of thing. So then Unkit's numbers of Friends Inspired, as well as everyone downstream from those people, would also tack on to Unkit's downstream network, and they would be measured with our app, and we'd have this number, and we can indicate that here. So that's Friends Inspired. We talked about families uplifted, trees planted is obvious, and then eventually water wellspring. So rainfall conservation is very powerful, because you can regenerate far more trees than you plant through simply having good soil management, so that the water is not running off into the rivers and running off into the streams, but staying there on the land, and then it gives new life. It allows for the regeneration of desertified land. So continuing on with the various, so along here, climate healers, veganism education, environmental awareness, and southern forest. These are videos that are available through our app. And the next one relates to goals and self-empowerment. So this is obviously looking at how a person can be empowered and what they are doing intentionally. And so what we expect is that in the early going, when someone is brand new to the app and they haven't used it yet, or for the average sort of blue Democrat, that this would be their Enviros map, that this is their awareness and involvement in these different areas, generally speaking. And if we were to take the average person using the app, this is our projected, how they would score. So with all that said, Enviros is something that we can measure, and we want to use it as a reputation currency, allow for something to be done. So you just, as with the frequent flyer miles, you can trade it in to fly more. We don't want people to necessarily cause more harm to the environment. We want them to do more environmentalism with those enviros. And Sadhana Forest is a powerful group in tree planting. That's the group, that's our tree planting affiliate. And so we want to enable people to be able to go to Sadhana Forest and volunteer through their enviros. Maybe they could trade in their enviros or something like that in order to qualify for a free flight to and from round trip. Or on the other hand, for those who don't want to fly, who don't want to go anywhere, but are happy to give people a good hard push in the right direction, they could use their enviros to support others to go on these trips. And how exactly we do that is not entirely determined. Maybe there has to be some type of monetary source that's actually really believes in the Enviros system that says, oh, great, even more people trading in Enviros. Oh yeah, I'm happy to provide these dollars because I do believe in Sadhana Forest and I do believe in the Enviros. And so that's an open question to the group. How do you do that? At this point, I'm happy. I have a video that I could play. It's about 3.5 to 4 minutes. We could do share screen. I can play it. And that would be on Sadhana Forest, or we could continue on with the conversation. So I want to kind of, how about Ankit, you raise your hand if you think I should play the video. Okay, probably not is what I was thinking. So then probably just continue on with the conversation without playing the video. Okay. So that's the one that I have here. And I think Ankit, you had emailed about a potential currency or system. And so this might be a good time to transfer the reins over to you to talk about that. Would you like to do that now?
Okay, we can surely go dive into the other currency, but do you want to expand further, like your journey? How did it start, so that we also get some context on how did you come up with this idea of and what of this currency and what this reputation currency is? Because I'm not sure like everyone on this call might be familiar, because myself I'm struggling to understand
Sure.
reputation currency and its background.
Yeah.
And I would also like to see like for example the things that you're struggling with. For example, how do you convert that reputation currency into, say, the ticket to go somewhere? So any real world like connection, if you could draw from that, like how do we
Yeah.
make it work?
Yeah. That second piece is really where I'm struggling. So any input from the group is very welcome. As to how to think of reputation currency, the way I think of it, I think a really practical example is when you get on Amazon and you make a purchase. So now, hopefully, as much as possible, we're all shopping locally. But when we do shop on Amazon, and Amazon's not carrying that book, and you're going to buy it used, or you're going to buy it through some other vendor, there's going to be a 5-star. There's a 5-star system for those vendors. And so if someone has 1,200 ratings and their 98% is their number and they're really close to full complete 5 stars, then you're probably thinking, okay, chances are they're going to send it in reasonably quick turnaround and it's going to be in good shape. And if they say that the book is in good condition, then you're going to believe them, that kind of stuff. So that's an example of reputation currency. And so here, in another example, to an extent, is even frequent flyers miles themselves. So there's like these special lounges that in some international cities, in which because you're a Gold Star member or because you're a Red Lounge member or whatever it is, because you had so many miles, then you can have access to that lounge, while others are excluded. And so it's something that there's like a reputation that's like tacked on to the fact that you've earned so many miles. So similarly, there's so many enviros, this person is committed to environmentalism, and What as to the conversion, how do we make that happen? I think I think that part of it is um, establishing credibility. If we establish credibility around sadhana forest, that's one. People with money that are let's say private family foundations that have money. They um, they could probably see that sadhana forest is doing excellent work. We could make that argument. Um, and then on the other hand, if the app, if we're really changing people, if we're helping people um, do better. I think be a better environmentalist. So environmentalism, I think of it as in basketball terms as for many years it's been all defense. We've been told play defense, consume less, uh, less carbon emissions, um, less garbage, less. There's no offense. But in actuality, oh, that's my sorry. Emergency curfew report in Portland, Oregon, apparently. So, lost my train of thought. So, environmentalism. Okay, but there is an offensive side to it. The offensive side is reforestation. The offensive side is communicating the climate solution. And the offensive side is diet, because diet is so powerful. So what we're trying to do with our app is really enable people to play. Then it becomes fun. Then imagine playing 48 minutes of basketball defense all day long. Or, now you get to shoot the ball. Now you get to pass, dribble. There's so much more to the game. And so it's the same with environmentalism. If we can really enable people to play it, they might actually have fun with it. So yeah, that's the idea behind it, is if we could establish some credibility in both of those areas in sadhana forest and then our app, then perhaps there will be large donor organizations and maybe even private individuals that would say, yeah, I put some money in it. And it could be a GoFundMe thing too. We get some money that way.
So let's see if the group, anybody has any questions. Otherwise, I have a few more things.
Becky.
Okay, thank you. I'm wondering, it's beautiful, by the way. Thank you.
Thanks.
So my reputation would be visible to everyone. So if I share this with someone and they're just starting out on a vegan diet, they would be able to see, and somebody would be able to see. Is that part of it also?
Great question. Currently, we don't foresee it being shared with other users like that, like all users. It would be more of, right now, at least currently as it's contemplated, is that it would be something that you could just kind of exchange if you qualify. It's like a qualify thing. You qualified, so you get the blank. You qualified, so you got to sleep in the Red Lounge in Singapore this night. That kind of thing, as opposed to you talked to all the other mileage members and you're the one that had more. So anyway, so that's, at least right now, that's how it's being currently contemplated.
So I would just like to add some interesting thoughts. Since you yourself are trying to find ways of connecting the real world application to this reputation currency. So the other example that I was trying to bring into the fold of this discussion was the learning currency. So why that was kind of interesting, because learning is something that you can transfer to someone. It's a knowledge information exchange, which doesn't really take physical goods. It doesn't really take physical goods in transaction. So that is something that is easy to trade, and it's something that uh, the more you share, it doesn't decrease with you. So similarly, on that line, if you look at this one also, if you want to start, let's say whoever wants to participate in this game is contributing $100 to begin with at the beginning, and they all say that we are a collective. We are trying to do $100 towards something. We are going as a mission. And then at the beginning, we ourselves will start collecting the resources that we need for empowering people to do rainwater harvesting, or people to grow their own Miyawaki forest, or something of that sort. That itself is building the resource while they're pooling in the dollars, and together they are shaping the future of this journey. Just a thought I wanted to put in there.
You mean just as a more general sort of empowerment in various other reforestation projects? Is
Uh,
that what you mean? Like,
more like, how do I bring the sovereign? First, I need to bring in the sovereign resources into the fold,
okay.
and at the same time, how do you nurture the sovereign resources for further? For example, even if you want to travel, you need to like trade it in terms of sovereign, make it happen.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that is the example of even what the Bernard was trying to point out in his learning currency of Dora land, where there is some aspect where you are bringing in the sovereign to buy some goods that only your sovereign can purchase, but at the same time they are having a kind of an alternate currency being created so that people can start trading amongst each other for something, a resource that cannot be exhausted. For example, knowledge and information cannot be exhausted, and people can keep on trading with each other, offering knowledge and information services. So so there is a value in having that alternate currency that people can start sharing. At the same time, you're having sovereign that's pooling in, that can be utilized for that thing that cost of physical resources.
Right. Yeah. I think, yeah, I agree that there has to be some ways of thinking through. We have to think through the interfaces as to how there's the traditional system and the sort of like what's called the cooperative system, right? In that talk, he refers to it as the cooperative system. And um, I don't know. We have to
So
work that out.
So maybe one more example I will
Hmm.
like to give.
Hmm.
This is something that fascinated me. Was a story of someone who was creating using Miyawaki method. He created an organization called A Forest, and he has a TED talk. So it is so interesting that when we look at the social disparity that exists globally from between the global north and the global south, so $1 cost like buys me 80 Indian currency, 80 rupees, which itself, like, what do you say? I can have a larger impact. For example, Sadhna Forest is located in Kenya. Is that where it is? Sadhna
That's
Forest.
one of the three. It's Kenya, Haiti, and India.
So it's very powerful when you think about the sovereign that we can pull in terms of
Hmm.
dollars in
Hmm.
America for people participating in it, can actually help us grow, like, what do you say, when in terms of acreage of forest that we can cultivate in the global south can be much more and much faster. At the same time, we can engage the resources in global south who are deficit when it comes to knowledge and information. So while the young kids who are participating in growing the forest over there can engage with the the people living in the global north who have access to information and knowledge, can learn from them. And the simplest thing that people can offer them is English. Just learn
Hmm.
English from them. That is a very powerful interaction even that can be created, and that is very simple things which doesn't really get exhausted, those kind of interaction, and it creates meaningful bonds. Just some thoughts, like building on that learning currency aspect of it, the reputation currency, and how they can blend together, because it has to be ground up. That's how I feel. Like, even if this as we focus more towards the technology, instead we have to more focus on how do we the social processes in the society, how will people engage with this, how will people build the community around this, how will how will this community be driven to a shared value or a vision. So that has to be pondered. Maybe in the group also, people might have some thoughts.
Right. Um, I know this is my first meeting with you guys, and I have I'm a total newbie. I don't know how many times you guys have met with, each other before. So I don't have the background, but if I may, Arvin, if I may offer. So I highly recommend you check out Remote Year and remoteyear.com. They have a really interesting business model. What they do is, and they charge money, but you write in this really in-depth application. And if selected, you get to be a part of this itinerary with a small group of people, and you get to spend your entire year working remotely. And the itinerary is like different cities, and every city you go to, depending on the theme that you're participating in. So if somebody wants to is like a creative professional, and they have a mental block and they want to write a script for a documentary or something, and they want to be part of this whole thing because they're looking for inspiration, they will be bundled together with other like-minded creative professionals from anywhere in the world, and they'll together participate in this itinerary for the entire year. And it's called Remote Year because they get to work remotely. And as part of the itinerary, what they get to do is they would go and participate in some local, nonprofit projects that Remote Year are seeking to help with. So it's a very interesting model, and obviously it's not it's nowhere identical or even similar to what you're trying to create, but I think there could be some transfer of learning because it's so if I am the person who signs up with Remote Year, I give them dollars, and then Remote Year takes those dollars, takes the cost component out of it, and they also probably share in with I don't really know how the revenue model works, but then I'm just trying to see how it might actually work out. So when people travel, just because they're connecting these creative professionals or some other type of people with the projects on ground in those different cities, somehow there is a barter that's happening. And there is no money doesn't exchange hands. And I think if you were to kind of like go in depth, you'll be able to probably see how that works. I haven't participated in one of those, but it just jumped out at me that if we're talking about getting the money from somewhere, so Sadhana Forest receives money through charity or donation from people who can afford to spend some money because they really like the idea of reforestation. And then whatever money is generated, you use that as the engine to run the system. But people participating in the system earn these reputation points, and so essentially with Remote Year, what seems to be happening is that people who participate in it, they become part of this remote nation, they call, and they get to participate in all these different projects if they're part of the itinerary, etc. And people who receiving their hard work are these small NGOs and nonprofit organizations, orphanages, and other places, where these people will stop by and give their hard work, time, and effort to. And I really like Ankit's idea because there's a lot of language instruction that happens like this. So typically, people from native English speaking countries would become part of this itinerary, and they would go around to, I don't know, parts of India or parts of, different parts of Africa or other, Latin American countries. And they would actually teach them English. And then that just becomes the currency that they trade in. And if, for instance, you go to a potter's village and whatever pottery they create, they give you some of the pottery that they created because you taught them English, and if you're a creative professional and, you're a sculptor or something like that, then you're interested in what they have to offer. So in a way, it's thematic. And so whoever is going to give you something versus what you give to them is, it just feels like one of those creative revenue models out there that you could probably gain some inspiration from.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. It's really interesting what people are doing, and I'll have to look into that because there's always these clues, with other systems. There's all these clues, and it may be that there's some clues set in there. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
If nobody has anything, I wanted to add something to what Nivi just mentioned. but I'll just wait for others to respond or if they have anything.
Yeah, maybe. So first, I think it is a very good initiative, and I want to remark that with the currency models, just to give a bit of background, my work is mostly focused on research on complex systems. And from what I hear from your presentation, I think there are two aspects that really apply here. One is that this is a behavioral change, that the cryptocurrency, the goal of the cryptocurrency is not only to subvert the economic system, but to generate deep behavioral changes. And one way in which one can better select the points of engagement is by identifying the most frequent interactions people have. And because the most frequent interactions are those that are done mostly without thinking most of the time. If we can rewire somehow through those interactions that are most frequent people's behaviors and then set them in a cognitive dissonance that later sets them to rethink what they're doing only once and then to start generating patterns of behavior that are new. I think that is also much more sustainable in many ways than many other forms of intervention. The other thing I want to point out briefly is that these sorts of projects require some degree of transparency in the following way. It's not only about how your contribution benefited a community. It is about what happens if you didn't contribute. So there needs to be something in economics, important from economics, called counterfactuals. What happens if that didn't happen versus if that happened? And that helps people bring intuitions. For example, what happens if you buy something that is renewable versus something that was not renewable? What was the environmental cost disrupting the earth versus what you already did and prevented? And the idea of preventing a larger evil from occurring, if we may use the word evil here in a metaphorical sense, that is a very powerful message. So I think this can be, or your system can be leveraged in those two specific ways to increase its impact, which is already a very significant one.
Okay, thank you, Santiago. Appreciate that. I'll have to think about, again, this stuff is pretty heady stuff. I found to really sit down and absorb, think about it within the system, how that might affect things. But I've taken notes and I'll think about it.
I think we should not overwhelm Arvind because this is a study group. So let's explore it together as a group. So I'll just build on a few things like Santiago mentioned about deep behavioral change, and the second aspect that he built, I am having a hard time trying to understand the frequent interaction. If you do not, that is something that he will have to elaborate. But with it, something about deep behavioral change, I would like to connect that idea with what Nivi just mentioned about remote year. There was something parallel organization called Gap Year. So this is something when you think about a high school student or 12th grader in America, when they graduate, where would they end up? They would end up in a college. What when they end up in college, what happens is that they're getting primed up to get into that pyramid scheme called debt, where student debt starts, then your car debt starts, your housing debt starts, and they're pushed into that cycle of then become, what do you say, that kind of cog in the machine over there, and then just go into that grind. And that is what is happening. So if we can, let's say, stop gap over there, stop, like have a plug over there, where having channelizing all these high school students who understand my future is at risk and these education system is not priming me up for that, given an opportunity for a year with a thematic pursuit, where you are having a theme set for them to pursue and explore the purpose of life, see sheer poverty that they have never seen here in US especially. When they get to see that for that 1 year, where you're nurturing as a group, taking them through that journey, could become very powerful and profound when it comes to their behaviors, definitely, that they won't be pursuing the life that they are. And not to mention, even a 12th grader from America has a lot to offer, lot to teach in those global south, than one can imagine. They are already bringing a lot of value when they go over there. So just a thought, like it's a very powerful, if we can think and start building it rather than just talking about it, start building it. Maybe in our future group sessions, we can come prepared, even just throw these ideas out there and start having those concepts take some hold.
I want to interject a bit here because I used to run this program with climate healers where we were taking students from Iowa to India and have them work with the villagers in India. And so it was remote places of Rajasthan that they were going to. And what I found is that actually the students learned more from the villagers than the other way around. So it really was a much richer experience for the students than the students teaching them anything, teaching the villagers anything. It was the other way around. And they were actually changed, from a deep perspective. Like the students would come back and they're very different people. In fact, the first time we took a group from Iowa, the professor had come with them, and the professor had come with them. He turned vegan on the spot when he saw what was going on there. So he turned vegan and he convinced his wife to turn vegan too. And he sort of challenged her saying, because she said, how am I going to bake without eggs and ghee and butter and so on? And so he challenged her, said that by the end of the year, Sarah, I want people to ask you for your recipes because I know you can do it. And that's exactly what happened at the end of the year.
And also something just to add something to that. Arvind, when I think about reputation, it's more like when we think about scoring, I don't know how the scoring would work because when like a context that I'm familiar with in rural India, the reputation currency, how it works, people actually know what you've done and they are the one who are creating history. So it's not a quantitative, reputation is not something quantitative as much as qualitative. So for qualitative, when it comes to organization that you worked with, the journeys that you've been on, the movies, it's all qualitative to an extent. And so that is also something to think about because how do you quantitate something that is qualitative in nature?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have an answer for that.
Exactly.
Arvind, there's an app, I just want to build on what Ankit just mentioned. There's an app called Foursquare that we all know about, right? And then when you earn some medals and there's like nothing to be earned apart from labels. And people yearn to get those labels because those labels are just like, you wear them like these medals of honor on your profile, and whoever's in your community can see that you're a gym rat because you checked into the gym twice a day, every single day on you've been around. And then if you go to I don't know, a shopping mall and you're shopping at certain types of places, then they give you a specific label for that. So if I go to a salad bar, they'll call me a rabbit, or something like that. And then a fancy medal or a little label will appear right next to my profile. And I think that can be a powerful motivator, um, and of course there's merit in quantifying this because you want to be able to barter and trade this like sovereign currency, right? And with sovereign currency wherever those interfaces exist. But I think the qualitative aspect that Ankit just mentioned is really important too, because that drives our motivation and it boosts our engagement with the app.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that note. Yeah, badges is something we've definitely toyed around with. And we were going to have it come out in this release, like to have some badge award system. And eventually we just said, no, thanks, not this release. But it's something we are, if we can come up with a good badge system, we'll definitely pursue it. Yeah.
Since we have 20 more minutes, we could probably try exploring the topic itself of
Okay.
the wealth. What is wealth? Because that itself is so broad, and like we have to redefine wealth. And over there today itself in the morning, I was reading Santiago's paper about he's trying to redefine wealth in context to awareness of social justice and environmental justice. So Santiago, do you want to pick up from there, and others can also chime in about redefining wealth?
Yes, thank you. I'd say that the way I've been trying to get a step into the problem is by understanding what wealth does environmental wise and social wise. And it basically, from the point, so let me get back and order myself a little bit. The basic tenets of economics that we know are, number one, wealth is infinite. At the same time, we have a finite amount of matter that is usable, matter, information, and energy that is usable in the world. So in order to accommodate the expectations of infinity into those of things that are limited, we need to exploit nature or exploit people. And in both cases, we need to make violence to the planet and to everyone else. So if we turn that back on its head, maybe it would be useful to define wealth as a measure of how much planet we spend when we purchase something or when we pay for a service. Money as a measure of how much of the planet we spend, or how much of the planet we put at risk when we perform an action that implies economic exchanges. That turns into, for example, at the environmental level, if we cause damage to the planet that is irrecoverable in a reasonable time, then we are increasing our risk as a species for not surviving long enough. Things that point to that should be infinitely expensive. So, for example, war should be infinitely expensive. Social injustice should be also infinitely expensive, or things that lead to social injustice should have a very high price that is unaffordable. So instead of using wealth as a proxy for scarcity, we should use affordability as a proxy for survival of the human species in a way that is humanly, in a way in which life is worth living. So part of the work that I've been doing is putting that which I've said into words into mathematical statements that then can be modeled and can be put in computer programs that try to understand how that would look like. So this is what I'm planning to do with our study group, that the meeting we had in the morning. And the notion again is that, again, every time we use currency, or we use forms of currency to purchase goods and services, we need to consider what the cost was for constructing them, and therefore how much of the earth has already been spent, so that we're decreasing our survivability in the long term.
That's really interesting, Santiago. And I wish in some ways I was part of that earlier meeting, so I could get a deeper context into the work that you're doing. As you were speaking, what I was thinking about is how much people, there are two concepts around worth, right? So wealth, and maybe it's synonymous with worth when we're talking about financial worth, right? And people think in terms of net worth and then self-worth, right? And when net worth and self-worth fuse together, almost like Venn diagrams, and there's complete union of those two, and that's where we see a lot of problems happening, because they're not able to separate the two, right? And that's where this whole idea and the game of exploitation, extraction, consumption, and violence becomes normalized, because there is no other way I can define my self-worth unless I have increased my net worth by spending more of the planet, right? If within apps such as the ones that Arvind's, trying to develop, and certain other systems, people are able to separate those two ideas of net worth and self-worth, then the deep behavioral change that you refer to is, there's a higher probability that people will be able to achieve that and feel safe achieving that. So people achieve great things when they feel safe enough to be able to achieve them. And as long as the Damocles sword of this net worth fused on top of self-worth, it's constantly hanging on top of our necks, then my business card, the pay stub that I got, will continue to define who I am.
That is a very profound observation that I had not considered to that extent up to this point, but I fully agree with. And the other aspect in this process of cryptocurrencies is that there's also this mismatch between the local expectation of how we should scale up production. If we look at like what Amazon does, we should scale up everything, and scaling up implies erasing local differences. Erasing local differences in turn involves setting up rules for everyone that are equal despite of the distribution of resources. Or that brings to the second problem, that therefore the value of things in an ideal case, or at least in the case that we seem to be speaking about here, should be also defined locally, but with some quantities that we all agree upon, or some processes for computing those quantities that we all agree upon, so that we can compare when something encodes social violence, for example. Let's think about the most horrible example is the diamonds that you get, and you have to remove tons and tons of land just to get one diamond. That should be unacceptable. And at the same time, to understand which these quantities should be, I believe that the process, for example, that these cryptocurrencies at some point will evolve towards increasing what society spends in this way, spending towards minimizing its future requirements, what it spends in science and technology. So doing this also forces us to move forward technologically in a way that might be more sustainable than the way it is done today. As an example, I come from Costa Rica, and I used to be the Director General for Research and Technology Development. That's when I met Sailesh, probably a couple of years later. And the question that we had is, how can we make an emerging economy? How can we agree on what development means, and how do we get there? And under the current rules, that is impossible. No matter if for example, if the country belonged to the OECD, which we tried hard and we achieved, but that is only another piece of paper saying you belong to this elite club, although you're not elite, you want to be there. And that doesn't make sense, or it doesn't make sense in the greater context of things. So the definition of what wealth means, in my opinion, also will propel to re-understand what research means and to put it to use. And that's something maybe it's worth taking into account in these conversations. And I'm really glad that we had the conversation this morning, because it's a many horse race. And one of the elements of this race is creating the tools that allow us to evaluate the feasibility of all these schemes in conjunction. It is not a competition of who creates the best cryptocurrency. No, it's what combination of instruments will lead us to the economic system that we are trying to dream of.
Very interesting. Navy, Santiago, you were taking us into a different trajectory. So I would just like to build on something that Santiago mentioned, and let's bring in people who've been silent for so long. So affordability. You mentioned something about affordability. So over there, something that came to my mind about was Gandhi's words. There is enough on this planet for everyone's needs, but not for everyone's greed, which ties to the self-worth, the net worth. So it's like if we bring down the minimalistic way of living, a cultural change, a deep behavior change, it's needed. But how do we do that, right? So it's a community which believes in those values can help us do that. So does anyone have any thoughts? How do we go about building that community that cherishes that kind of a wealth, that kind of a worth, which cannot be defined by sovereigns? Anyone want to jump in? Benjamin, Shankar, Rebecca? Yes.
Well, I don't want to jump in if somebody else has something right now, but it was something I've wanted, I'm sure you have too, for a long time, would like to know when I buy something, where did that come from? You know, early on it was where the clothing, what country, what did they do? And so to have something that you could immediately tag it and say, oh, this uses so much carbon, this one doesn't. Oh, that might help me decide, oh, I want to fly over here. How much carbon is that going to use? Well, it's important enough, you know. So, Arvin, you mentioned something about measuring things and that you have some measurements. And so that's good because sometimes just a number, oh, this costs 30 carbon units and this one's 1,300 carbon units. But something about knowing, I mean, some people don't know about the diamonds and what they cause. And I just recently saw something about gold and how they're putting mercury in the rivers to get the gold. And so something that allows us to see, oh my gosh, I had no idea, you know, I don't want to do that at all. I will not do anything if it means that kind of destruction for the planet.
Just a funny note, Rebecca, I wanted to add to that. Recently, like about 2, 3 years ago, McDonald's tried to do this experiment of trying to portray like where your meat is coming from. They wanted to like map it out. And this is something that they launched in Australia. Oh, they recalled it immediately after a month of releasing it because they were afraid that people will start asking those questions that you're just asking. But we need those questions to be asked and we need to see the source. And it's possible, right? Right now, only the banks are holding all that information.
Right, that's a great point, Ankit. In fact, I do know where that campaign came from. So it was initially created by Unilever, one of my past employers, and it was called Demystify and Inspire. And what they would do is the first leg of it would be demystification, which is explaining where things come from. And then the second leg would be hoping to inspire that by having given that knowledge to the consumer, they would be able to steer consumer behavior a certain way. And it works with some brands and some categories, and it, you know, doesn't obviously work with how McDonald's tried to do it in case of where the meat was coming from, because it disrupted potentially their supply chain and you know, the price that they could charge for it. It's a really interesting thing around, you know, there are two ways principally how people change their behavior. Either they are inspired by something or they are fearful of something. So positive change and, you know, and negative reinforcement. And Rebecca, the point that you were making around, if I know what is the carbon unit that was, you know, a label, something like that, that tells me that this thing utilized so much of the carbon, that then I would either it would be a deterrent or it would be a motivator for me to purchase and invest in that. And somehow, if that purchase were to add up to whatever my score is, and that's to Arvin's point around what my reputation is, then, you know, so for instance, if in Arvin's app, I do something related to communication, which actually costs me more carbon units, and then I end up doing something around, I don't know, some other thing on your wheel that you showed that utilized less, then the net of it would be my reputation. So, you know, when we're always constantly weighing and prioritizing, people would constantly move towards whatever maximizes or reduces their carbon footprint and maximizes their reputational currency. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah, it does. It does. That's really interesting. And on that subject of, if I may ask this question to the group, what would you like? You know, if you had if you had some enviros and you had developed, you were assuming you got into the app and you had these enviros in different categories, and then this question came up of reputation with respect to your peers, because that's not something I've been contemplating. It was brought up in this group. How would that be useful? How would you use it? What would you like to do with it? Things like that. Question to the group. Yes.
I'll put it on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Yes.
Same here.
I would put it up on my resume. I would have it on LinkedIn. I would have people sort of, I would request for recommendations with whoever I had an opportunity to trade services or any barter situation with, so that I create more and more recommendations that are not in lieu of somebody paying me or me having paid someone, which is currently how it works. Like, you need to be somebody's client or, the other way. But the barter and that recommendation is what gets me my next role, my next job, or a recruiter is looking at me and so on.
Sweet. Yeah, so that's great. I'm glad you said that. So we were thinking it would be nice if it were something you can just, you click on it, and then you can take, it takes an image of it, and then you can put it elsewhere. Yeah, okay. That's so great to hear. Thank you. Any other thoughts, or any people would perhaps agree with Nivi's proposed use, like they would like to do that if they could, kind of thing? Ankit, I see you nodding your head. Others?
I was just thinking, if I saw a comparison, I would want to know who's doing better than me and how did they do it? Because that's what I want to do. Are they eating less of that, or what did I do? Or how can I get rid of those plastic bags? I mean, it would be kind of a kind of competition, I guess.
Okay.
Maybe for a sticker. I mean, I do things for stickers. I mean, that's.
And also maybe trying to understand opportunities for cooperation. There may be situations in which the use of enviros would be increased if two people join heads together, or if many more people join heads together. And that, I think that's one of the things that I believe needs to change. The fact that we resort immediately to, again, it is no one's fault. It is how we are set up by education systems and everything around us. But competition should not be the default mode of thinking. It should be cooperation. And natural evolution has done the job of competing quite a lot. And we should be spending that energy budget that we have into building cooperation. So maybe there's a way in which people gain points by cooperating rather.
I have a question. That's a really interesting thought, Santiago. I have a question. So is there a good platform for environmentalists to cooperate with other like-minded folks? Like, this is not driven by a company or an organization. It's not like, hey, come volunteer at our project this Saturday, but instead something a little bit more like you were saying, it's based on opportunities for cooperation. That's what it's all about. That's the platform.
I don't know of any off the top of my head. I can't search.
So I would also like to add something. Let's say Kickstarter, you want to launch a campaign along with a group, and then this could be definitely be valuable, right? That you want to project yourself, that you are going towards a mission or somewhere. So that is how I thought, like, that could be one of the places. And I liked what Nivi just mentioned about recommendation, immediate value, because that's how reputation currency really works. The reputation that we build through our actions is what drives other people to recognize it and then forward you their link, social network to you. And that is how, even let's say we saw a good documentary, then we would be absorbing that information and then we pass it as a quality recommendation to somebody else, because that is how the reputation works, right? Reputation currencies in terms of recommendations, like that's the natural downstream of a reputation currency.
Yeah, excellent point.
So now we are nearing the time, 5:30. So should we go ahead and start wrapping up our discussion so that we can at least, like towards this end, we can discuss like when do we want to meet? Did we like this session? Should we just continue this rhythm on a monthly basis? Meet again next month, same time, same place, same first Monday. How many of you over here like this? They can just show their hands if they like the session and we should continue.
And Kit,
Just
I
a
was,
question.
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Salish. Um, since I'm in the East Coast, and it's like coming on to 8:30 p.m. and I haven't had my dinner. So would it be, and I'm terribly interested in all the conversation that happened just now. Would it be possible for us to move it by like 30 minutes earlier instead of 7:30, maybe 7 p.m.?
4 o'clock, everyone. Is that a good time?
Yeah. Also, I was going to suggest, Ankit, let's have this meeting every 3 weeks instead of every month, so that it coincides with the modeling group meeting in the morning. And then people can join the modeling group and listen to what Santiago is working on and what Pareen is working on too.
Yeah. So the only challenge with that is that the first and the fourth Monday when we are meeting, that naturally then the next meeting we have after that is like in 2 weeks time or 1 week time at sometimes. So
No,
we'll
no.
have to be prepared for those kind of frequencies then.
It'll be every 3 weeks, no? I thought the modeling group was meeting every 3 weeks.
No, we're not in a recurrent pattern. Instead of going for recurrence, we'll try to have meaning set. First Monday, fourth Monday. Set it at
Nice.
certain thing so that it's in everyone's brain. They don't have to overthink it, whether when is it coming. Is that possible? Is that something we want to do as a group? Do we have that kind of an engagement like every first and the fourth Monday? Or do we take it slow at the beginning?
Again, for me, at the beginning, until October, that I hopefully defend my dissertation, time is finite. So I could contribute only once a month and every 3 weeks on the modeling platform, or on the modeling meeting, sorry.
So Sailesh, let's just take it slow right now. Let's
Okay,
have the
no
group
problem.
digest it. Let's build it. And as we go, we can then pace it up.
No problem.
Yep. Any other suggestion, any closing remark, anyone, please jump in.
So what's our final decision? Is it 3 weeks or is it every first or fourth?
Let's stick with first of the month. Next month, let's meet again. If we have this kind of a group, we'll take again like a decision at the end. If we like this session, how it's going, then let's increase the frequency. Let's decide next month on first Monday.
Okay, thanks.
All right. So then thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining. Arvind, it was great. You set the tone for our discussion today. And we had such a diverse discussion. So next time we'll try to bring someone else to set the tone. And then let's dive into different aspects and throw in ideas and maybe build after that on the group. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining. Have a good day. Take care. Bye.
Thanks. Thanks, Ankit.
No problem.